I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I've had the opportunity to be here for a couple of days, and just walking back and forth from the hotel, I'm so impressed with the beauty of this area and all of the attention paid to bringing sculpture into the walkways and reminding us that everything, once it's given sort of a sense of curiosity, can be formed into something that's recognizable. You know, they say sculptors actually make the room that they're working in speak its real story. And so one of the things that I like to think about with foundation research is that it does help us tell a story of a region, because foundations are the public record of philanthropy. We rarely, know who gives what to who. But when we look at foundations, and at Jankowski we have been doing this research for over 25 years, we can then begin by capturing their grants and looking at their patterns of giving and receiving, begin to create a very accurate roadmap to the philanthropic spirit of a region. So I think it's especially auspicious that I'm here at the Clinton School of Public Service today, because I think that we are entering a new time, a new age of philanthropy. And the challenge is to really be thinking about how does philanthropy address the need to re-engage people in their communities as a real pathway for civic engagement. And by using its resources, its commitments, its people, its programs, philanthropy has the opportunity to not only alleviate human suffering and to engage people in creativity, in their own creativity, but to also play a role in reigniting civic engagement. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today, but that's the framework that I come from, is that one of the things I love about working, I've worked in the for-profit, nonprofit, and government sectors, and one of my favorite things about working in what we might call the public benefit sector is there is always a given. You know, the given is we're all connected. And if that starts as your given, that we're all connected, then you'll begin to design and create and envision a world where the nature of those connections are stronger and deeper. Because the stronger and deeper those connections are, the more people flourish. And the more people that flourish, the more families that flourish. And the more families that flourish, the more communities that flourish. And the more communities that flourish, states flourish, regions flourish, the country flourishes. So the shift in consciousness that we need now to go to the next level of recreating institutions and organizations and structures that help people, everybody, move from surviving to flourish is right now. The door is opening right now, okay? All right, so here we go to talk about philanthropy throughout the Southwest, but we're going to also do a deep dive into Arkansas. And in addition to what we have in the study, I did some deeper cuts of the data to help us really understand some of the things that make you go, what's that about? What's going on? Okay? All right. So, yes, the survey, the giving study. The giving study covers 7 states in the Southwest: Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. So if when you get back to your offices, you would like to send this out, you can get a copy of the giving study as a PDF online at Philanthropy Southwest's website, right? Okay. And Philanthropy Southwest is the oldest membership association in the country. It's nearly 70 years old. And back then, the founding story is that there were a group of foundations in Texas that were interested in what their other peers were doing, because they thought, gee, if we if we talked to each other about what we were doing, we might have more impact. Does that sound familiar? We're sort of like, they were collaboration before collaboration was cool. They're on third generation collaboration, right? And so they were also envisioning something that is becoming more and more central to doing the work that we do, which is how do we go from good to great, right? How do we have impact? So what this study does is create a very literal roadmap to what foundations are doing so that people can begin to understand not just foundations where foundations are giving, but what is the nonprofit network that supports social change. So I'm looking at so for right now you're using your color data pages from the given study, right? So this is the full data set. And here we, oops, sorry. So this is the data set. One of the key strengths of the data set is that we capture and key and standardize and code grants of $1,000 and up for all of the foundation surveyed. That means that we create the most hyper-local data set available where foundations are giving. We literally map 98% of every grant that's paid by foundations. So we've mapped 98% of total giving for Arkansas. And that's 245 foundations and over 8,000 grant recipients. So just to be clear, the data set includes foundations. It would be private grant-making foundations, community foundations, and when we look at the private grant-making foundations, we're also looking at the big foundations, but we go to the same level of depth for the smaller foundations, which, why I love smaller foundations, because most regional nonprofits have access to regional givers, smaller foundations, family foundations, that kind of thing, and they begin to give us a really nice picture of what individual giving is probably like, because family foundations have a personality that's much more attuned with individual givers than with the structures of big foundations that are giving nationally and have online applications and communicate with you, and they're staffed, all that kind of stuff. So when we look at the data, we begin to think about what are the different personalities of foundations themselves. So yes, the overall trend is pretty exciting throughout the Southwest. That giving is up by 22.5% since the last study, which was 2011, and assets are up by 28% since 2011. And this compared nationally between 2011 and 2014. On a national basis, giving was up about 22% and assets increased about 32%. So we're seeing these rise and increase in assets and giving all around the country. The foundations throughout Philanthropy Southwest area comprise about 11% of all foundation assets and 12% of all foundation giving. On your giving study, page 5, you'll see a comparison of 2014 assets compared to 2011. And in this, what we're looking at is comparing percentage giving, not actual dollars. So trying to right size the information back to the state itself, right? And what you see here in Arkansas, oops, I don't have a skill yet with this. Hopefully by the time I'm done here, I'll have mastered the pointer. What you see here is the Arkansas is at the top, right? And you see that their assets increased by 51%, but giving between the two studies decreased. So what do we have the mics ready to go? I do like to see what you think is going on there. See if who's got a finger on the pulse of their own region. What might be going on with this assets and giving trend? Does anyone have a guess? Yes.
I suspect that the recovery from the economic recession in 2008-9, they're regaining assets and they haven't really benefited disbursing those yet.
So the answer was that there's a recovery from the economic recession and foundations haven't caught up with the giving with their assets. That's true in many ways across the whole data set, but why do you think Arkansas has this particular pattern? Like that might be something that you'd see across a region, but we see something different going on in Arkansas. What do you think that is?
If you'll hold up your head, we'll get a mic too.
Yeah, we have mics if you hold up your hand. So in Arkansas, we have a lot more volatility in the foundation world because we have two giant foundations that have pass-through dollars, right? So Wal-Mart is a huge foundation that money comes in and money goes out, right? So, and then it's just, there's only 245 foundations, so just little sways in Wal-Mart and the Walton Family Fund with gifts received, the amount of money coming in, the amount of money going out sways your data, right? Because they are big enough to determine all the patterns. And we're going to take a little tighter look at that in a few minutes, okay? So here is your data, Arkansas, for 2014, 29 to 2014. And you see it evens out a little bit. Oops, sorry, I'm not going to get this down yet. This is in your handout. This slide is in your handout. But what you see is that between 2009 and 2014, there was a 32% change in assets and a 6.3% change in giving. So what we're seeing is some of those assets got paid out, right? So the basic point is not to memorize the actual dollars, but to notice that the personality of Arkansas foundations is very volatile from this trend point because of the pass-through dollars, right? So foundations here are actually giving way above the 5% payout, okay? All right. This next slide, and back to your giving study, which is page 9 of your giving study, looks for the entire region at what societal issues are addressed by foundations across the region. So education, as was mentioned, is the top recipient category, and that's followed by human services, health, public societal benefit, and the arts. And one of the things I want to point out here is that this slide, and when you go in and look at the full report, looks not just at trends across the region and by state for foundations, but also it's a tool for Philanthropy Southwest members to also begin to understand and benchmark themselves against the trends for the region. And all members of Philanthropy Southwest have access to the Excel spreadsheets and the data that supports the report. So rounding out the societal issues addressed is religion at about 5%, the environment 5%, international at 4%, and then just other uncodable is less than 1%. Okay? Now the coding of the grants is important to us. So we use the coding system called the National Taxonomy of Exempt Entities. Are you guys familiar with that? Right? It's like the SIC codes for the nonprofit sector. It helps define and create buckets of quote-unquote industries within the sector itself. So that way, if you're a human services nonprofit and you want to understand who are the other nonprofits doing the kind of work that I do, because why would that be an important thing for you to want to know here? Who are the other nonprofits who are working in the human services field? Why would that be important? Raise your hand if you'd like to get a mic. I'd like to make it a little bit more, but we need to have it recorded. So don't be shy. Why would it be important to really know other organizations working in the same field? There we go, right? Oh,
It's just to see what works for them, and is there any carryover to us? Is there anything we could do that could help them?
right. And what's that called? Yes. So everyone said relationship, right? Yes, it's important to know the field, right? Because we actually exist in a field. And by understanding that field, we understand the nature of what will help that field to either grow or what are the barriers that are getting in the way of transformation, right? And I know it takes time to do this, but it's a critical element of the work that we're all doing now in the nonprofit sector, is not just who we are as individuals and organizations, but also what the field is, right? Now, why would it be interesting and important to know the field of foundations giving to human services? Say there's 25 foundations giving to domestic violence, and you've got a relationship with 2 of them. Does it help you to know who the other 23 are? Okay. Do you think you'll get a grant from them? Possibly. But before you even get a grant from them, what else is so important that you know? Pardon me? That they exist, who they are, that there's a field, right? And that's what I'm saying. We're at this really, really interesting time where we are beginning to understand that we have to think a lot more systemically and holistically about the relationships that exist between, you know, fields of donors and fields of nonprofits, and then what was offered a few minutes ago. What are you doing? How does it work? Can I learn from you? I have something to share, right? So that's called field building. Why are these relationships and field building strategies important, do you think? Does anyone have a, you know, I'm telling you, this is not pass-fail. I guarantee you know why, and you don't have to be shy. I mean, we all know why, right? Why would it be important? I see someone here with their hand raised. Yes, go ahead. Deeper impact, right? If we're here because we really care about the mission, vision, values of the organizations we work for, whether we're a donor, whether we're a foundation, whether we're a nonprofit, then intrinsic and baked into our actual way of doing business has to be the desire to put ourselves out of business. And that means I want to hold myself accountable to my work. And then once I begin to hold myself accountable, my accountability isn't because someone is forcing me or it's a punitive structure. I'll take on evaluation, I'll be performance-based, I'll create the metrics, I'll do anything it takes. Because alleviating human suffering, serving my mission, is why I'm here. And then when we begin to look through that lens, going to work every day, as hard as it is, you're doing the work that needs to be done to do what? We go back to what I said in the beginning, so that individuals flourish, families flourish, communities flourish, states flourish, regions flourish. But it's not just the people being served that flourish through this lens. It's everybody. It's everybody. Because that's what civic engagement is. It's everyone being invited into conversations about how can I be involved in a way that I help foster, steward, participate in transformation. And I have never met a person alive, I guarantee this, that hasn't been something that they desire. And the neuroscience of this is pretty undeniable that we are hardwired for social connection. So the reason we keep going back to that well is because we're hardwired for it. It might be hard, but damn it, we want it. So what we do when we create stronger relationships, when we use data to help leverage our work, we optimize the opportunities. We accelerate the timelines. And that's the commitment that we get to make by choosing it. By choosing to participate, to partner, to converse, to follow on the founding story of Philanthropy Southwest, to want to have impact. Okay? All right. So we also look at, on the given study, on page 13, at community foundations, and Arkansas has, one giant community foundation. It has 3 community foundations, but the big one is statewide, and it's really the 95% of the data on this page. 247 million in assets and about 15 million in giving. Okay. All right. So here we're going to segue into your giving study, page 14. So we're going to look directly at Arkansas. Okay. So, once again, Arkansas is home to about 245 foundations. These are foundations that are based in the state of Arkansas. If a foundation files some other state, it might find itself into the data set because we look at 2 other fields within a Form 990 PF. We look at the state and corporate field, the state incorporated field, and also the list of grant recipients. So if a foundation is with, Wells Fargo in North Carolina, but their state incorporated is Arkansas, and their recipients are in Arkansas, they will be included in the data set, okay? So total assets, let me just turn my page. I think I keep hitting, now I'm like putting my little thing everywhere. Okay, so total assets are $4.8 billion with total contributions of over $690 million. And like I said, we captured over 8,000 of the grants paid by these foundations. The average grant size for Philanthropy Southwest members is nearly $124,000. The average grant size for the rest of the foundations in the state is $86,000. Okay, so those of you, raise your hand if you work for a nonprofit organization that receives funding from foundations. Okay, so most of us. So tell me, is the average grant that you're getting from foundations $86,000? No. That's not happening, right? What do you think is going on here? What's going on here? Tell me. Somebody see what you think about this. Yes, sir. A few big ones are blowing the average up, right? Right, so you're aware of that. So one of the things that capturing grants of 1,000 and up, we can actually look at the world of community-based nonprofit fundraising, right? They're not hospitals and education institutions that are going to get these $100,000 grants and up. So what do you guys think is the median grant for foundations in Arkansas? The median size grant. We're half above, half below. All right, how many guesses? 10,000? 10 to 15? What do I hear here? 5. We're closer. It's $6,000. Yes, that's always a groan. That's a groaner. I can tell you you're better than Texas. Texas, the median size grant is $2,500. Yes, yes. Okay, so this is where I like to talk about why do we collect and use data. It's to help us understand. We're meaning makers and we're map makers. And we want to have a clear map and have the right, expectations about what we're doing. right? So you all have to promise that in no way will you ever use giving study data as a weapon. So raise your hands. I promise, I'm serious, I promise never to use giving study data as a weapon. There's only one good use for data. It's to widen perception. I promise. Thank you. You guys, this is where we are in the world. If we continue to use data as a weapon, we will never invite people into the conversations we need to invite them into, because they will feel that we are judging them as right or wrong. And I don't think that helps anybody, because it's actually not true. What I know is everyone's giving it the best they can. And maybe they need to know something. And all of us can be humble enough to admit we don't know what we don't know. And that's why we have something called conversation, right? So developing this awareness around data itself, that it's not something to pound over somebody's head, it's something out of which we decide, you know, the saying is knowledge is power. Well, we have a choice, whether that's hierarchical power or the rising tide raises all boats kind of power. And if we want it to be the rising tide raises all boats kind of power, then what we say is proceed with knowledge. Make your decisions based on what you know, try them out, try something again, and stay in the game. Okay? All right. But it is certainly something to think about. If there's some conversations that all of us need to have, especially when we look at the majority of foundations really are family foundations, is how do we bucket money? How do we understand that $6,000 doesn't go very far? What kind of conversations are we having about what it takes to do the work that we do? And go from there. So for you guys, again, in your handout is, I thought you'd be interested in just seeing the breakdown throughout the state of where foundations are located, right? So any surprises here for anybody? No? Yeah, I'll give you a minute to look at it. You know, clearly Pulaski County is the real base. Over $1 billion in assets, 64 million in giving. Okay, I'm just going to give you another minute to look at that, just see if you have any thoughts on that. You would know a lot more about this than I do, but this is not an unusual breakdown for a state, that the foundations tend to be headquartered in urban centers. Okay. And then here's our list from page 14 of our top 20 foundations by assets and giving. And so in order to be considered a top 20 foundation by assets, a foundation had to have at least $23.2 million in assets all the way up to the Walton Family Fund, which is at $2.8 billion. And then to be considered a top 20 foundation by giving, the range is all the way from $1.3 million in giving to about $361 million in giving for the Walton Family Foundation. Well, because in doing the report, we're trying to focus in on identifying the biggest impact, the foundations that are sort of like the leaders of the whole, parade. God bless you. And some foundations include program-related investments and other kinds of support to nonprofit organizations. And what we do is we're only capturing in the giving study giving, right? And so some foundations that aren't as sophisticated as others look at data like this, and they want their total, all the money they put into their programs. So we made a decision across the data set to list the information alphabetically. All of you have access to their assets and giving and stuff like that. But it became a little bit of a red herring years ago when we began doing this kind of research. Okay? And not to say that those initiatives aren't increasing and that they're not important, they're very important. But again, the goal of the giving study is to understand relationships between foundations and the nonprofits in a community, and we really focus in on the giving. Okay? We actually don't even include operating foundations in the data set if they do not have a grants component. Okay? So, and then this is a pie chart that just looks at what are the societal issues addressed by foundations throughout Arkansas, right? So you see that arts is about 7%, education, which was mentioned earlier, 39%, environment 12%, health 5%, human services 20%, international 3%, public societal benefit 11%, religion at just 3%. So again, education is the top, and this just gives you a breakdown of the pie, the percentage given as well as the number of grants we captured in each of those categories. And now we look at the geography of giving, and this is certainly a place where Arkansas is also quite unique, right? So when you look at the geography of giving here, this is on page 12 of your giving study, what do you see? 64% of giving throughout the region goes to the home state of the foundation, right? So that means 65 is made in the home state of the foundation. This is through the whole region. And the rest is going to other states in the Philanthropy Southwest, around the country, and around the world. What do we see here in Arkansas? Huh? It's the other way, right? Sort of like 80% goes outside the state. Or it goes, it's flipped. Of the $690 million in contributions by foundations in Arkansas, $158.4 million stays in Arkansas. Okay, so I was on my way from the airport into town the other day, and I was curious talking to the Uber driver, and he was explaining to me how he organizes his business. And one of the things he does is he checks the flight schedules for when planes are landing, so that he's in the queue for people like me, ready, and I only have to wait 5 minutes for my Uber, right? And I was like, boy, that's pretty clever. And he goes, it's the only way to make it work. I said, what do you mean? He said this to me literally. He goes, to make it work, you have to know where people are starting from. I was like, that's Arkansas and the flow of dollars from foundations. So we can look at that $690 million, which is fascinating for organizations who are working in some of the key categories of the two biggest givers, right? And then where are we starting from if I'm a community-based nonprofit, right? So how much money is staying here in Arkansas? Yes?
Wait for the mic, please.
The question.
Can you tell us how many foundations are in the giving of the other states? Like thinking about the foundations that are based here and the dollars that are going out of the state, do you know how many make up that 450? Like, is it Wal-Mart?
Yeah, we're going to actually look at that in 1 minute, for sure. This is the key thing that I was like, okay, we've got to look at this, right? So let me just show you this slide really quick. So this is also, so if we look at that, okay, so where is that 158 going, right? 158 million going. This is the distribution, back on your giving study, page 15, of the $158 million in MSAs around the state, right? Okay, so you see the Fayetteville area gets nearly $73 million in grants paid in that MSA, right? So Little Rock comes in at about, the foundations in Arkansas in 2014 made about $52 million in contributions in the Little Rock MSA. So that's what this data is showing. And then below, it's just looking at it one other way. So the urban rural giving. 83% of contributions are made in urban areas, and 17% are made in rural areas. Okay? All right. What I can say is across the whole Southwest, 92% of the philanthropic dollar is made in urban areas, and 8% is made in rural areas. Yes, I see some shaking heads, and this sort of all of a sudden I get something that's going on, right? We have a real divide. We already sort of know that there's a divide between urban and rural, and what does that mean? But here's some data to show and back it up around the philanthropic world. And how do we begin to make the case that we have to look a little bit wider? Because many rural areas come up much higher on things like poverty and high school graduation and some of the systemic impact of generational poverty, things like that. Okay?
There's a question right here.
Yes, sir.
You said 92% in Philanthropy Southwest versus for urban versus 8% for rural. Do you know what the national average is or the comparison?
I do not. And I'll tell you that another way that Philanthropy Southwest is pretty cool and visionary and unique is the only way to get at rural giving is to look at grants less than $10,000. And Jankowski is the only research shop that does it, right? So the data doesn't exist outside of the Southwest. They've made a commitment at Philanthropy Southwest to developing a data set that serves their entire membership, whether it's the big foundations or the family foundations that are working at the community level. Yes, sir.
And you know the population of urban versus rural percentage in the Philanthropy Southwest region?
I love that question. I'll have it by Denver. No, I don't. Do 92% of the people live in urban centers? Because if they did, then there would be alignment. Yes. I can check that out. Does anyone here know what percentage of people in Arkansas live in the urban centers? Okay. So I just want to come to this Wal-Mart and Walton Family Foundation. So for Wal-Mart, they're really swaying the data, and I think that your question is sort of answered here by looking at just two foundations. One of them, the Wal-Mart Foundation, 96% of their giving, $174 million, is outside of Arkansas. And Wal-Mart gives in all 50 states. And here are the top 10 states where Wal-Mart is giving outside of Arkansas. And you see it starts with DC, Illinois, Arkansas, so it comes around. So Arkansas is its third recipient area. I live in Maryland, and I see the DC and Virginia dollars there, and I'm thinking, I'm getting more than you guys. But that's what we look at when we look at the flow of dollars, is where it's going. And Walmart's had a strong presence in workforce development in our region. So they're giving all around. And I think if we look at these two foundations, we really do understand the geography of giving, because they're Wal-Mart and then Walton sway everything. Where for the Walton Family Foundation, 84% of their giving is out of the state. And of course, they are a foundation that's really focused on the environment, K-12 education, and their home region, Northeast Arkansas, right? So this is a bigger trend, is that more and more foundations are, even family foundations, are beginning to address and focus around causes, not necessarily around geography. Okay? Yes?
Wait for the mic, please.
We need the mic. Right here we go, right here. Thank you.
The data, rural, urban, without the.
I did, 2 slides. Give me 2 slides. We're on the same page. So I just thought you'd like a list of foundations by giving in Arkansas, right? So here you have the Walton Family Foundation. Even though so much of the money goes elsewhere, they're still the largest funder in Arkansas. And you see Wingate is second and Wal-Mart is third. So Wal-Mart at $14 million here is in the top 3 foundations for the state. Okay? So that's another way that, you know, the first thing to look at is, that's interesting. And well, let's look this question. Well, then who is giving here and how do we understand those foundations? So these foundations are your field for Arkansas-based giving. And it really behooves all of us to know what these foundations are doing, because even if we may never get a grant from them, they are funding innovation, best practices, they're creating networks, they're behind vision, all that kind of stuff. And in order to be, you know, knowledgeable, like when we started out talking about why know my field, you want to know who their scrutiny, who they're funding, because that's organizations that have passed some bar that you could learn from, and you also understand where the field is moving around the things that they care about. Okay? So here is a revamp of the societal issues addressed. When we just look at the $158 million that stays in Arkansas. So this is on your handouts. So originally, for both, education is top. But here, arts comes in second, followed by human services. So environment is third when we look at all giving by foundations in the state. But if we just look at giving in Arkansas, environmental grant making is 7th. Okay? So depending on whether you are a nonprofit organization that has access to some of the big foundations, you're working with a very, in a way, different personality structure than those of you here who are working at the community level. Okay?
The question right here.
Yes, sir.
Could you explain the difference between societal benefit and human services?
So public societal benefit grants go to organizations like the United Way, other foundations. Hold on one sec. Anticipating I might get this question, I printed out a list of the top, oh, please have it in here. These are some of the top grants in each category, right? So I'm just going to go right over to public societal benefit. Okay, so what we've got is some money to community foundations and peer foundations. And we've got things like the United Way, mostly. Okay? And then down from there, you'll get things like nonprofit management, capacity building, some government, you know, if someone's partnering with a government agency to do some work, things like that. They're more broad. All right? Does that answer your question? All right. So just one other way to really look and slice the data to understand what's happening is this chart that looks at giving by, foundations by giving range, right? So here we see that, you know, there's 20 foundations giving $1 million or more. Everyone else, the vast majority, so there's giving across a range of sizes. 80% to 90% is in 20 foundations, and the rest is through the works of smaller community foundations. Okay? Around the country, this holds true. That this kind of pattern where about 80% of assets in giving are held by about 50 to 75 foundations in any data set. So once again, just repeating that those are the sort of, usually the far more structured foundations that are funding around very intentional lines of giving. And then the rest, including family foundations, are taking up the larger numbers with smaller buckets. And it's, I think, part of this relationship building that we talked about in the beginning is really understanding how do we begin to build bridges between the sort of institutional knowledge and the expertise and the work being done by big foundations in a region and the family foundations and the other people who have networks of influence and connections at the local level, and inviting them into a conversation about impact. And what happens for many foundations who are small foundations is that, or mid-sized foundations, high net worth individuals, donors, is they don't know that there's even a structure as complicated as there is for philanthropy. So we go in, you know, all excited rather than listening to meet them where they're at and then start bringing them down a path to higher impact. One of the reasons they say, who's the guy who founded Apple? Steve Jobs. One of the reasons they say he never really became a really high impact philanthropist was he brought in a bunch of consultants to talk to him about philanthropy, and every single one of them was trying to tell him how to have impact. That guy. I know. It's hard to believe. He was completely like, I don't want to hang out with those people, right? So, I mean, just a cautionary tale that the point is made, that many times what we think is the way to go, and you might be right, needs to be educated. People need to be educated about the why, the how, and the way transformation even works. And this is one area where I think nonprofit organizations might have an advantage over the for-profit sector, because that desire to educate for any entrepreneurial organization is going to make the difference about whether it goes to scale. So every entity has a cycle that it's going to go through to get to scale and then to reinvent. So you have this, you know, idea, and then you have the early adapters, and then you have the people who believe in it, but then there's this thing called the chasm. And this is the way every entrepreneurial organization moves. You have to cross the chasm to get to scale. And what do you guys think is the #1 reason why entrepreneurial organizations don't get to scale? We hear a lot of great stories about people really hitting home runs, but most business startups don't get venture capital. Yes, right? Yeah, they don't get it. The reason is this. It's universally underestimated what it takes to educate people about why something is a good idea. So venture capitalists are taking risks on the low-hanging fruit that'll be easy to educate people about because it's like an addiction. I want that. It's harder to get people addicted to, alleviating human suffering. But nonprofit organizations love to talk about their work. So being able to put together communication strategies, talk to our donors, get people on the same page, really talk about what is valuable about the work that I do. That is necessary. It builds those deeper relationships, but it's often the thing we don't have enough time to do because of the pressing needs of day-to-day operations. So this is where, again, we begin to think about what would it take to go to scale. And it usually has something to do with understanding the field, who are my partners, what's the good works, what's needle-moving strategies, taking some pauses, convening, talking. So we see that shift underway, that leadership is viewed as convening. And that Meyer Foundation in Washington, D.C. just came out with a great report on the role of capacity building as a strategy for really shifting into more sustainable approaches to addressing the needs of communities at the local level. So that idea of capacity building is really building out that communications function, that storytelling function, integrate it with fundraising and everything else. Okay? So this is the same data within the asset range, just to give you an idea of how the foundations break out, bucketed by ranges of assets.
Is that asset range aggregate or total?
It's their total, right? So 4% of foundations have 50 million, 10 foundations have $50 million in assets and up. Okay, so now I want to pull out, you got two handouts, charitable contributions by itemizers. Right, and so one of them shows us the United States average charitable contributions by buckets of adjusted gross income. And one of the reasons I like to share this is that when we looked down at Arkansas in 2014, we know that giving by all Arkansas foundations was $690 million. But giving by itemizers was $1.4 billion, right? So when we develop this infrastructure for speaking about what we do, it's not just for foundations, and it's going to affect wider networks than foundations. It's going to affect the actual philanthropic landscape, right? And that is affecting $1.4 billion in giving. And in my experience, we don't have good data on the flow of dollars by individual donors. About 80% of individual giving is itemizers, okay? So this data is from the IRS tax returns of itemizers. But when I only look at family foundations in the data set, the flow is like 60, 40, 75, 25. So we can estimate, perhaps, 75% of this money stays here and 25% goes elsewhere. Often that's family members, alma maters, things like that, right? So when you look at this, look at the United States in 2014 and look at Arkansas in 2014. What are some of the things that jump off the page? And raise your hand so a mic can come to you. I hope something jumps off the page. Here we go. Okay, I'll repeat it since I don't want to make you run all the way over there. The average contribution for Arkansas is above the national average. Pretty cool, huh? So the average contribution in Arkansas for all households is $6,536, when the national average is $5,807, right? Right? And then if you look at the actual buckets for adjusted gross income, what we do see is that at all of those levels, except for 200,000 and up, Arkansas also is above the national average, right? There's the other one that jumps off the page. You see, did you hear that? The other thing that jumps off the page, however, is the percentage of itemizers in Arkansas is 18%, where the national average is 24%. So there's a funny little way that Arkansas could be benchmarking against itself and leading the way for the whole country, because the only way to go is up. When we think about having a locally based, give where you live, invest in our communities, which I know that's what the Rockefeller Foundation and some of the other foundations here are doing. But the question becomes, who are we speaking to? How do we make the pool of people who we're talking to? If we do a lot of capacity building in nonprofit organizations, that conversation has to land in a fertile field of people who want to invest in their communities. So when I've been involved with philanthropy promotion for many years, and what we think about is what are the concentric circles moving out? For the people who need to get invited in, they don't know. And so how do we invite them in? And there's a lot of potential here in Arkansas for that invitation. Okay, so let's go ahead and just quickly look at, yes, here's a question and here's a question, yes.
Let me get the mic. Hold the mic.
Here's the mic. Yes, because they would be itemized. That part of that 80, 20, 70, 30, right. And I love churches as an example for a mindset that everyone should adopt. We have to keep the lights on, right? We have to keep the lights on. And most families, family foundations, etc., they don't know the difference that we've created in the nonprofit sector around program versus operating. So there is an expectation that's very different, but I think it's something that I think it's something we could all learn from faith-based giving. Is there's no shame in lights, there's no shame in office supplies, there's no shame in admin. In fact, it helps us do our jobs. It helps us optimize the good works, right? Yes.
So I love that idea, but what about, do you do any sort of research where you look at how much is general operating versus programmatic support?
So, we used to do that years ago. And what we found was it had so little return on investment for the end user. Big foundations tend to be program oriented. They have structures, they have people, they have someone reviewing it, they're building mastery. They might do capital, they might do this, they might do that. And so the match, the relationship, like why would I want to partner with you? Why would I want to have a conversation is so much more important to know, because then you can look at their profile and see, oh, they've got a website, these are the 10 ways I might participate. And that's in the hands of you. Like for us to compile that data, it had so little value to all the time it would take to do that, because the vast majority of foundations are general operating support. And that's because they're small and mid-sized and family foundations, and they're just doing what they do. The same way you might give to an organization because you care about its mission. Okay, so this is where we had to make sort of a decision on where we were spending our resources, and we went in the direction of more grants at smaller levels than using editorial time to decide and code the 1,000 grants that are from big foundations that's generally publicly available. Okay, great question though. Sir, did you have a question? Oh, she asked it, good. All right, a lot of same thinkers. So I just think there's a lot to be said here in Arkansas that, in general, it's getting above the national average and a lot to build on. And then, again, so when I think about hyperlocal, I begin to think about, how do we begin to have differentiated conversations? My husband is a school teacher, and he works with, in a high-poverty school in Washington, D.C., and it's one of the bottom 5 schools in the city. And if you know Washington, D.C. school system, you know that that's one of the bottom 5 schools in the country. And he is in special education elementary. And all the zeitgeist in education nowadays is, and he's trained in the Common Core, is building the scaffolding so that you're meeting the students to build out their knowledge, right? And when you work, of course, I know many of you, how many of you are working with, organizations, you know the story that he's working with many children who, their issue isn't special education, their issue is generational poverty and a poverty of resources, right? So, this creates a kind of fragmentation about what they know and what they bring in and what the nature of how it all fits together happens. And his experience is this experience around really embracing the idea of differentiation versus fragmentation. That each of the children have something to offer, and again, going back to my Uber driver, when we know where they're starting from, we can begin to build out what will help them flourish, right? And so I think we're sort of at that time with philanthropy, is like there are some real needle-moving best practices happening in communities that can be adapted. Can we create the roadmaps and the relationships between what works, who does it, how does it happen, so that we can help take a system that is terribly fragmented and then begin to build in a system that has power because it's differentiated. So in a classroom where things are differentiated, there's actually connections being built around what the students need to flourish. And so that's why I really love charitable contributions by MSA. And I have this data at the zip code level. That would be just hundreds of things for any data set. But then we can begin to look at, in communities, what would be some messages that might resonate? What resonates here and there? How do we begin to invite people into the conversations that we need them to have so that all of our communities flourish, because they flourish when it happens. So part of our work as communicators is we are all in, not just the field of programs and causes. Each of us here, whether we're a donor, an amazing public policy advocate, a nonprofit, a foundation, there's always a part of what we're doing that is communicating the value itself of our work as we increase that field of people who want to participate in transformational work. And that's hard to remember each and every day, but what we do that's different than any other institutions is that we create a pull. We're pulling people in. We're saying, come, participate. And in that way, your work is not like a variation on a theme that's wearing people down each and every day. It's actually the alternative conversation that will give not just you more sustainability, but them as well. So we're also serving the philanthropic spirit when we start to looking at things more around the networks, the people, how we help something that's very fragmented become something that's strong because each person plays an important role in the whole. And that means your organizations and your networks, etc. So I don't have any big, deep insights into this. I thought there'd be some of you here that just might like to have it and to see what it looks like. I think one of the fascinating things, though, is that when we looked at rural giving, it's on the back. Rural communities are measuring up to the rest of the state. So it goes back to, I think, partly Tim's question about, they are giving at averages that match the national average in Arkansas as a general. And I thought it's important to know that, because a lot of times I think we have an idea that rural communities don't have the resources that they have. But there's clearly some resources coming out of rural communities in Arkansas with $387 million going to nonprofit organizations in 2014. Okay? Do you have any questions about any of the research? I have just one last thing. Does this look like a researcher now? All this paper? I was on my way in here and I saw a quote by President Clinton. One of the, we always know. Jen, you have researchers in your life. Does this happen? I have a slide that I like to use to finish my presentations. And it's a quote from the author of The Little Prince. And it's like, life has taught us that love does not consist of gazing at each other, but in looking outward together in the same direction. And I think this is really the heartbeat of the nonprofit sector, the public benefit sector, that we need to recommit to looking toward something together. That it is in creating these kinds of relationships, not good, bad, right, wrong, high, low, worthy, not worthy, important, not important. You know, there's this idea, you know, beyond right and wrong, there's a field. I'll meet you there. That's the leadership challenge for each one of you, to take that on and to help define what we're all for. Because our task is not to foresee the future, but to enable it. And what we know is this. If we commit to what we're talking about today, leveraging our networks, our connections, our knowledge, our best practices, our funding, it can only result in something more fantastic than we can imagine. It's great to imagine it, but what I know is it will be far greater than anything we can imagine. And so when I was walking in here, I was completely thrilled because there was a quote outside from President Clinton's second inaugural. And I think this really does get to it. But let us never forget the greatest progress we have made and the greatest progress we have yet to make is in the human heart. In the end, all the world's wealth, 1,000 armies are no match for the strength of the human spirit. So with that, I'm going to close and I'm going to say thank you very much for letting me be here.